In a parched future, the once verdant plains of the United States have been reduced to a sun-scorched wasteland. Most families have abandoned their homes, but Ernest Holm, a stubborn optimist, refuses to leave. He clings to the hope that with enough water, the land can be restored. His son, Jerome, who has never known a world of abundance, questions his father's unwavering belief. Two individuals, driven by desperation, attempted to gain unauthorized entry into a small structure located on Ernest's property. When Ernest confronts them, a violent confrontation ensues. In the ensuing chaos, one of the intruders is killed, and the other, begging for mercy, reveals a rumor of hidden water. As he reaches for his pocket, Ernest, ever vigilant, sees a weapon and fires. Jerome, witnessing the events from a distance, believes he could have intervened. However, Ernest, his face etched with the harsh realities of their world, reminds him of their familial bond. With renewed determination, Ernest unlocks the building, revealing a well pump. Unfortunately, it yields no water. The father and son must continue their perilous journey, their mule suffering from the unrelenting thirst. As their quest continues, they encounter the Watermen, a powerful group that controls the distribution of water through a government agreement. Trading supplies for a precious commodity, Ernest and Jerome secure a lifeline, albeit a temporary one. Ernest cautioned Jerome against provoking the dangerous Watermen, emphasizing the importance of swift trading and departure. He persistently tried to negotiate a more affordable water supply for his farm, but the Watermen's demands were exorbitant. On their return journey, their mule suffered a severe injury, leading Ernest to euthanize the suffering animal. Jerome, though distressed, insisted he could have handled the situation. Upon reaching the farm, Jerome's sister, Mary, prepared a simple meal. As she cleaned the dishes, Ernest tuned into the radio, and Jerome indulged in his artistic hobby, sketching animals. Suddenly, Ernest was alerted to a disturbance and discovered Mary had eluded the house to meet with a secret companion. The following day, Jerome and Ernest visited Sam's auction house to acquire a robotic mule named Simulate Shadow, or Sim, to replace their injured animal. Sam's son, Flem, also participated in the bidding, engaging in a competitive contest that ultimately resulted in Ernest's victory and a further increase in his debt. Afterwards, they visited the hospital to check on Catherine, the injured mother of a local child. Due to a previous accident, Catherine was unable to walk and required a specialized machine to assist her mobility. The family faced a significant financial burden to purchase this essential equipment. After a pleasant afternoon with Catherine, the pair returned home. En route, they encountered Robbie and Susie with their infant child. Ernest expressed his disapproval of their use of the child to solicit handouts, and drove away to avoid them. At the gas station, Ernest filled the tank and purchased a few additional items. He then returned to Robbie and his family, offering them some water. The couple had considered selling their due to financial difficulties, but Ernest advised against this and promised to assist them with the water supply. Later, at the farm, Flem, Mary's secret boyfriend, arrived. He requested to borrow Sim and offered to pay a rental fee. However, Ernest insisted on a guarantee from Sam. Flem became upset and threatened to never irrigate the land. During their next encounter with the Watermen, Jerome and Ernest made good progress. Sim's assistance allowed Ernest to persuade the men to consider an offer for installing a water line on his farm. Afterward, Ernest began excavating his old pump to allow the Watermen to assess its condition. While working, he encouraged Jerome to socialize and meet new people, but Jerome preferred to focus on his family. On their way home, they noticed Flem driving past at a high rate of speed. At the farm, Mary attempted to wash clothes using a vacuum cleaner and cleaning agent. Ernest arrived and forbade her from leaving the farm, leading to a heated argument. Mary insisted on her independence, while Ernest claimed he was only trying to protect her. Mary accused him of favoring Flem over her father and attempted to run away. She encountered Jerome and asked him for money, giving Ernest time to catch up and stop her. Mary burst into tears, accusing Ernest of failing their family. He then locked her in a room and nailed the window shut. Later, Ernest and Jerome awoke to discover that Sim had been stolen. Ernest suspected Flem and went to his house, only to learn from Sam that Flem had left for the mountains earlier that morning. It was revealed that Ernest's farm had once belonged to Sam and Flem was obsessed with the family's loss, despite Sam's belief that the land was infertile and would not benefit from water. Ernest went to the mountains to investigate and was suddenly knocked unconscious. He later awoke at the Watermen's camp, where he was accused of stealing their supplies using Sim. Ernest denied the accusation, but Caleb, the leader, attacked him. A heated altercation ensued, during which Ernest managed to obtain Caleb's knife and a rifle. He fired the rifle into the air to disperse the crowd and fled the scene. Caleb continued to shout threats at him. On his way home, Ernest discovered Flem sleeping near the fire, with Sim nearby. Flem had stolen the machine and supplies to frame Ernest. Ernest waited until morning to awaken Flem, pointing the rifle at his face. He then tied Flem to Sim, who was carrying the stolen goods. As they walked under the harsh sun towards the waterman, Flem taunted Ernest by mentioning Mary. Ernest retaliated by pulling the rope to make Flem stumble. Both men were eventually overcome by thirst, and Flem convinced Ernest to stop for a drink. The supplies contained alcohol, not water, and Ernest soon became intoxicated due to his addiction. Flem pretended to drink while claiming that Caleb sought revenge and that he had only stolen the machine to survive. He even offered Ernest money, which Ernest declined due to his suspicions. Ernest attempted to stand up but was unsteady due to the alcohol. This was Flem's plan from the beginning, and he took advantage of the opportunity to strike Ernest with a rock, causing him to fall and hit his head on the cliff. As Ernest bled and lost consciousness, he experienced a flashback of Catherine's car accident, which had been caused by his drinking. When Ernest regained consciousness, he was tied to Sim, and Flem began pouring more alcohol into his mouth, behaving erratically. Flem then went to the farm, and Mary hopped on his bike to escape together. Concerned about Ernest, Jerome decided to search for him. By nightfall, he found Sim at the waterman's camp, where he was informed of Ernest's death in an accident involving the machine. When it was time for the funeral, Mary returned, and the siblings grieved together. They also had to visit their mother to deliver the devastating news. Flem picked them up in his truck and took them home. At the farm, a distraught Jerome began to hit Sim with a hammer. Flem intervened, explaining that grief was natural but should not interfere with their livelihood. He offered to become the new head of the family to assist the siblings. To Jerome's shock, he also announced that Mary was pregnant. Flem had ambitious plans for the farm, and Jerome agreed to let him try. That afternoon, Flem delivered supplies to the waterman and requested that Caleb install a water pipe on the farm. Caleb initially refused the request, but Flem accused him of being responsible for Ernest's death, citing the discovery of Caleb's rifle and knife near the body. Fearing the potential consequences, Caleb agreed to divert water to the siblings' land. A few days later, the new farm pump was installed, and Flem worked tirelessly to plant and cultivate wheat, which was irrigated by sprinklers. The family now had access to proper showers. Weeks later, Jerome was surprised to find a small leaf on the ground, and eventually, the land was covered in lush vegetation. To celebrate, Flem and Mary were married and tattooed each other's initials on their hands. During the party, Flem drank and pondered Ernest's death. A few days later, Sam arrived at the farm with two men from the bank. Ernest's debt was substantial, and they demanded that Flem repay it. Flem attempted to intimidate them by scaring the horses with his bike, but Sam scolded him, explaining that the land had never been desirable and that Ernest had only owned it because he had refused to move. Due to the water and crops, the bank was now able to sell the land, and Flem would have to pay to avoid losing it. That night, Flem loaded Sim onto his truck and picked up Robbie and his baby. Flem pretended that he was inquiring about prices but he actually sold the child against Robbie's wishes. Robbie became frantic and demanded the baby's return, but the buyers opened fire, killing Robbie. They also attempted to shoot Flem, who retaliated and fled the scene, leaving the machine behind. Sim was caught in the crossfire, and the damage caused the machine to activate a self-navigation mode that guided it back to its original factory. The next day, Flem repaid the bank using the money obtained from selling but he told the siblings that he had sold Sim to Robbie. Meanwhile, Sim arrived in the city and was discovered by its builder, Calvin, who found the owner's information and contacted the farm. Jerome answered the call and became suspicious, prompting him to go to the local market. There, he found Flem talking to Susie, who was holding a doll and pretending it was her baby. Jerome attempted to speak with them, but Flem quickly took Susie away. Later, at the farm, Jerome questioned Flem about Robbie, but Flem claimed that Robbie had taken Sim and abandoned his family. Determined to find the truth, Jerome announced that he would be visiting his mother, but he actually took a bus to the border. The guards refused to let him pass due to his age and lack of a guardian. At that moment, Anna approached him and offered to help him cross the border for a fee. Jerome agreed, and Anna placed him in a truck filled with chickens. Within a few hours, the truck reached the city, and Jerome saw it for the first time. Jerome reunited with Anna, who took him to the factory but only accepted half the payment. She explained that the round trip was a scam and that he didn't need a guide to return, as no one would stop him from leaving. Jerome asked if she knew anyone named Ernest, but Anna was unfamiliar with the name. Jerome then met with Calvin, who demonstrated the machine's capabilities. Sim's eyes were actually cameras designed to capture terrain for reforestation purposes and had recorded everything Sim had seen. Calvin taught Jerome how to use the machine and gave him privacy. Jerome became emotional when he saw his father again, but his emotions turned to horror when he learned that Flem had killed Ernest. Flem had tied Ernest to the machine and sent it towards the waterman's camp, making it appear as though Sim had lost control and accidentally dragged Ernest to his death. Jerome had a breakdown in the office. That evening, it began to rain on the farm for the first time in over a decade. Jerome returned and acted nonchalant, asking Flem how he had retrieved Sim. Flem was confused and checked the barn, shocked to find Sim unharmed. He claimed that Robbie must have returned Sim out of guilt. A few days later, Jerome visited Catherine in person and promised to care for her as Ernest had. One afternoon, Flem and Jerome went hunting to protect their crops from animals. Flem missed all of his shots and handed the rifle to Jerome, blaming the weapon for his failure. Jerome was tempted to shoot Flem but instead killed a deer, demonstrating that Flem's aim was the issue. When they returned home, Jerome hid the rifle in his room. During lunch, Jerome mentioned receiving a call from Robbie, who was looking for Flem. Flem became irritated and accused Jerome of lying. Mary scolded Flem for his attitude, and Jerome insisted he was telling the truth, causing Flem to leave the room abruptly. The next day, Flem received a letter written by Jerome, pretending to be from Robbie. The message asked Flem to meet Robbie at the cliffs because he was in trouble. Before leaving, Flem searched for the rifle, and Jerome claimed he had taken it to be repaired due to Flem's complaints about its performance. Flem had to play along to avoid being caught and apologized for his outburst at the table. Armed with a knife, Flem went to the cliffs with Sim and called out for Robbie. He suddenly fell into a hidden pit and broke his legs. Flem cried out in pain and begged Sim for help, but the machine did not respond. At that moment, Jerome appeared and stared at Flem with a rock in his hand, making Flem realize that the boy knew the truth. A desperate Flem pleaded for mercy, but Jerome remained unmoved, staring at him as he suffered under the scorching sun. Eventually, Flem began to scream for help again, begging Jerome to consider his sister and the baby. He delivered a long speech about accidents and regret, but Jerome became so enraged that he finally shot Flem, killing him. When Jerome returned home, he allowed Mary to believe that Flem had abandoned her, withholding the truth about Ernest's death. Thanks to the income from the crops, they could now afford proper food. The siblings agreed that they could finally purchase the machine so Catherine could live with them. Jerome deleted all the footage from Sim, prepared to start anew. Want to see more content like this? Subscribe and enable notifications. Thank you for watching.